Undercover billionaire orders black coffee. Waitress rebelled and delivers a note that shatters him. The faint jingle of the bell above Rosie's diner door mingled with the sizzle of bacon on the grill, the air thick with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint tang of old grease. Nestled in a fading corner of downtown Atlanta, the diner's yellow walls, adorned with cracked black and white photos of its 1950s heyday, glowed softly under flickering vintage lights, a beacon of stability for Sheila Carter. At 38, she moved through the space with a weary grace, her blue uniform slightly frayed at the hem, her white headband slipping as she balanced trays for the late-night crowd. A black woman raising herself up after her husband's abandonment, she'd poured a decade into this job, her nights spent scrubbing floors at Blake Enterprises' towering office building to keep a roof over her head. Her mind often wandered to her son, Jamal, back at their cramped apartment. His college aspirations a fragile hope she nurtured with every tip she earned, the weight of that dream etched into the lines around her eyes. But that stability was crumbling. Blake Enterprises, led by George Maxwell, a white billionaire known for his icy stare and tailored suits, had cast a shadow over her life. His company's latest project aimed to raise her neighborhood, turning Rosie's and the surrounding homes into luxury condos, a revitalization that erased the people who'd built it. Sheila had seen him in passing at the office, his voice barking orders about clearing those lots, his laughter cold as he dismissed the lives he uprooted. She'd overheard a late-night call once, his words about bribing city officials to force out small businesses like Rosie's searing into her memory, a secret she'd scribbled into a note during her shift. The diner's owner, Mr. Harris, an old friend trembling under mounting pressure, had confided that George's offers were turning into threats, leaving her isolated among vacant lots where neighbors once stood. Tonight, the diner buzzed with its usual rhythm, the clink of dishes a comforting backdrop, until George walked in, undercover in a casual sweater, his presence an uninvited storm. He sat in her section, ordering black coffee with a dismissive nod, his tip a mocking gesture that hid his true intent, to scout the last holdout before demolition. Sheila's hands shook as she poured, the pot's heat a stark contrast to the chill of his gaze, her strength buried beneath exhaustion. That note, tucked into her apron, held the power to expose him, a desperate move born of years of silent endurance. As he sipped, unaware, the seeds of conflict sprouted. Her life, her son's future, and the diner's soul hung in the balance, poised for a confrontation that would either break her or set her free. "You think you can serve me this slop and call it coffee?" George Maxwell's voice lashed out, sharp and cold, slicing through the cozy hum of Rosie's diner as he shoved the cup back toward Sheila, the black liquid sloshing over the edge and splattering across the white tablecloth. Sheila froze, the silver pot trembling in her hands, its heat searing her skin as the sting of his words hit harder than the coffee burns soaking into her blue uniform. The diner's late-night crowd turned, their murmurs fading into a tense silence, the yellow walls seeming to close in under the dim glow of vintage lights. At 38, she'd spent a decade serving with a forced smile, her nights cleaning George's office building where he'd never spared her a glance, her life reduced to scraping by for a son she couldn't see tonight. Now, this white billionaire, hidden behind a casual sweater but radiating arrogance, sat in her section, mocking her in front of everyone, his hazel eyes glinting with disdain. The patron's stares burned into her, a mix of pity and judgment, as her pride crumbled, the weight of her exhaustion threatening to pull her under. "I've had better from a gas station," George sneered, leaning back in the red vinyl booth, his voice carrying a cruel edge that drew a stifled laugh from a man at the counter. "This place is a relic. Should have been torn down years ago. You're lucky I'm even here." The insult landed like a punch, her chest tightening as memories flashed, of late shifts, of neighbors evicted by his company, of the note she'd overheard him dictate about bribing officials. Mr. Harris, the diner's owner, hovered near the kitchen, his face pale, knowing Blake Enterprises held his fate, his silence a silent plea for her to endure. Sheila's hand shook, the pot clattering slightly against the table, her knees weak as humiliation washed over her, the diner's warmth turning suffocating. But then her fingers brushed the edge of her apron, where a folded note rested, a transcript of that overheard call, her secret weapon scribbled during a midnight cleaning shift. With a shaky breath, she slipped it under his cup, her heart pounding as she met his gaze, a flicker of defiance sparking in her eyes. George unfolded it, his smirk fading as he read, the color draining from his face, the paper trembling in his manicured hands. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dropping to a growl, the diner falling into a stunned hush. The note hinted at his corruption, a threat to his empire, and as he clutched it, his shock mirrored the storm brewing in her soul. What would he do next, and how would this change everything? Before we continue this story, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's get back to the stories. The soft hum of Rosie's diner settled into a rhythmic pulse after the initial clash, the clatter of dishes and the faint crackle of the grill blending with the warm scent of coffee and buttered toast that lingered in the air. Sheila leaned against the counter for a moment, her apron stained with the earlier spill, the fabric clinging to her thighs as she caught her breath, the weight of George Maxwell's glare still burning into her. The diner's yellow walls, lined with cracked black and white photos of laughing patrons from decades past, glowed faintly under the soft hum of vintage lights, a testament to a simpler time she clung to amid her struggles. At 38, she moved through the space with a weary grace, her white headband slipping slightly as she wiped sweat from her brow, her hands rough from years of scrubbing floors and pouring coffee. Her mind drifted to Jamal, her son, back at their cramped apartment, his college textbooks stacked beside a flickering lamp, a dream she fueled with every aching shift. Though she kept him out of this fight for now, his future a silent motivator in her heart. This diner was her sanctuary, a refuge she'd carved out after her husband walked out, leaving her to raise herself with grit and determination. The red vinyl booths, worn smooth by countless customers, held memories of late nights counting tips to cover rent, the jukebox in the corner playing old soul tunes that lifted her spirits when the world felt too heavy. But that world was shifting. Blake Enterprises had already swallowed half the block, turning familiar homes into vacant lots strewn with debris, the air now carrying the dust of demolition instead of neighborhood laughter. George Maxwell, the white billionaire behind it all, sat in her section, his casual sweater a thin veil over the power he wielded with cold precision. She'd seen him at his office building, a towering glass monolith where she cleaned after hours, his voice echoing down hallways as he barked orders about clearing out the riffraff to make way for luxury condos. His arrogance had always been a distant storm, but tonight it crashed into her life, his presence a personal threat to the only stability she knew. Sheila's nights at Blake Enterprises had revealed more than dirt and trash. Late one evening, she'd overheard George on a call, his laughter sharp as he plotted to bribe city officials to force out businesses like Rosie's, his words about disposable people searing into her memory. She'd scribbled a transcript during her shift, tucking it into a note that now rested in her apron, a secret weapon born of desperation. Mr. Harris, the diner's owner, shuffled behind the counter, his hands trembling as he polished a mug, his eyes avoiding hers. He'd confessed that George's offers had turned into veiled threats, the pressure mounting to sell or lose everything. The theme of injustice simmered beneath her calm exterior, a quiet fire stoked by years of being overlooked, her strength hidden in the way she stood taller despite the exhaustion etched into her bones. As she gripped a fresh pot of coffee, the steam rising in delicate curls, her resolve hardened. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting for a home, a legacy, a future she refused to let him steal. George adjusted his cufflinks under the sweater, his cold gaze sweeping the room as if already measuring it for blueprints, his wealth a silent declaration of dominance. He'd built his empire on the backs of people like her, dismissing their lives with a signature on a contract, and tonight he was here to finalize the diner's fate. Sheila caught his eye for a moment, her heart pounding, the note a burning promise against her thigh. The air thickened with the unspoken battle ahead, the diner a fragile fortress she'd defend with every ounce of her being. How long could she hold out against a man who saw her as nothing? "You call this coffee? It's barely fit for the gutter," George bellowed, his voice a harsh crack that sliced through the warm hum of Rosie's diner, the sound echoing off the yellow walls adorned with faded black and white photos. He shoved the cup away with a flick of his wrist, the black liquid surging over the rim, splattering across the white tablecloth and soaking the crumpled note Sheila had slipped beneath it. The sharp scent of coffee mingled with the diner's greasy air, a bitter reminder of her labor, as the liquid seeped into the fabric of her navy blue uniform, staining the hem of her apron. Sheila stood rooted to the spot, the heavy silver pot trembling in her grip, its heat searing her palms as the sting of his words sank deeper than the coffee burns. Her chest tightened, breath catching in her throat as the other patrons turned, their eyes a mix of pity and judgment flickering under the soft glow of the vintage lights. George leaned back in the red vinyl booth, his casual sweater unable to hide the arrogance radiating from him, his wealth a silent weapon that made her feel small. She'd poured her heart into this job for a decade, scrubbing floors and serving with a forced smile, her night spent cleaning his towering office building where he'd never once acknowledged her existence. Now, here he was, mocking her in front of everyone, his sneer cutting through the fragile pride she'd built to shield herself from a world that seemed determined to break her. The diner's owner, Mr. Harris, shuffled nervously behind the counter, his weathered hands clutching a rag, his face pale as he avoided her gaze. He knew Blake Enterprises held his livelihood in a chokehold, their offers to buy out the diner growing more insistent with each passing week. The weight of his silence pressed on her, a reminder that she was alone in this fight, her mind flashing to the cramped apartment where her son's future hung by a thread. "I'm sorry, sir," she muttered, her voice a strained whisper, thick with the effort to keep the tears at bay. Her knees wobbled, the humiliation burning hotter than the coffee stains, as a couple at the next table whispered, their heads bent together in disapproval. But then her eyes caught the sodden note, its ink bleeding into a messy blur, and a spark ignited within her. She dropped the pot onto the table with a clatter, the sound jolting the room, and reached for a rag with deliberate slowness. Her fingers brushed the paper, lingering as she folded it into her pocket before George could snatch it back, a small but defiant act that sent a ripple of shock through her. His laugh cut off abruptly, his brows knitting together in confusion and anger. Had she just taken something from him? The other patrons froze, forks hovering mid-air as Sheila straightened, her shoulders squaring despite the tremble in her legs. The memory of her son's hopeful smile flickered in her mind, fueling a hidden strength she hadn't known she possessed. She met George's gaze, her chin lifting slightly, the note now a secret weapon tucked against her heart. This wasn't the end, and whatever that paper held, perhaps a recording of his callous plans or a plea for help, it might just be the key to turning this nightmare around. Have you ever had to swallow your pride in a tough moment? What did you do next? Share your thoughts in the comment. "You think you can steal from me, you little thief?" George roared, his voice booming across Rosie's diner as he shot to his feet, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. The spilled coffee had dried into a dark stain on the table, but his fury was fresh, his face flushed with rage as he pointed a trembling finger at Sheila. The note she'd pocketed had ignited something in him, his usual cool demeanor cracking under the weight of her defiance, and now the diner felt like a pressure cooker ready to burst. Patrons gasped, their murmurs rising like a tide, as he leaned over the table, his shadow falling across her like a storm cloud. "I'll have this place shut down by morning, your job, your life gone," he spat, his words laced with venom, the promise of ruin hanging heavy in the air. Sheila shrank back, her heart pounding against her ribs, the heat of the diner's lights pressing down on her as the humiliation deepened. She'd endured his kind before, men who saw her as nothing more than a shadow in their world, but this was different. The note, a recording she'd made on her phone during a late-night cleaning shift at Blake Enterprises, held evidence of George's illegal dealings, a conversation about bribing city officials to force out small businesses like Rosie's. Her hands shook as she clutched the pocket where it rested, the weight of her secret growing with each threat. Mr. Harris rushed forward, his voice pleading, "Please, Mr. Maxwell, let's talk this out," but George waved him off, his eyes locked on Sheila with a predatory glint. The tension snapped when a soft chime broke the silence. George's phone, buzzing on the table with a call from his assistant. He snatched it up, his back turned for a moment, and Sheila seized the chance. Her fingers fumbled as she pulled out her own phone, the screen glowing with the audio file, and hit send to a local journalist she'd met years ago, a small, desperate move born of instinct. George spun around, catching the flicker of her screen, and his jaw dropped. "What did you just do?" he demanded, his voice a low growl, the color draining from his face as realization dawned. The diner fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. Had she just ignited a spark that could change everything? Sheila's fingers still tingled from hitting send on her phone, the diner's warm lights casting long shadows across the red booths as the weight of her action settled in. The patrons had begun to whisper again, their eyes darting between her and George, who stood frozen, his face a mask of barely contained fury. But before he could lunge for her device, the door to the diner swung open with a jingle, and in walked Jamal, her son, his backpack slung over one shoulder from his evening class at the community college. He was tall and lean, with her same determined eyes, but the exhaustion in his posture mirrored her own. The long bus rides, the late nights studying under a flickering lamp in their tiny apartment. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, his voice cutting through the tension, his gaze locking on George with a protective edge. Sheila's heart swelled at the sight of him, a rush of emotion crashing over her like a wave. She crossed the room in quick strides, pulling him into a tight hug, the scent of his worn jacket, faint traces of rain and textbooks, grounding her in the moment. "Baby, it's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking as she held him close, the diner fading around them. For years she'd shielded him from the harsh realities, working double shifts so he could dream bigger than this neighborhood. But now the truth spilled out in hushed tones. "This man, he's trying to take everything from us, from everyone here. But I won't let him." Jamal pulled back, his young face hardening with understanding, and in that instant she saw her own strength reflected in him, the courage she'd instilled through quiet sacrifices. He squeezed her hand, nodding firmly. "Then we fight, Mom. Together." George watched the exchange, his sneer faltering for the first time, the raw bond between mother and son piercing through his armored arrogance. Mr. Harris, still hovering nearby, cleared his throat, his eyes misty as he stepped forward. "Sheila's right. This diner, it's more than walls and pie. It's family." The words hung in the air, a chorus of agreement rippling from the patrons, an elderly couple nodding from their booth, a young family sharing knowing glances. Sheila felt a shift then, the power dynamic tilting as her vulnerability turned to resolve. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from the journalist. "Got it. This could blow wide open. Meet me tomorrow." Hope flickered in her chest, a spark turning to flame, as she realized she wasn't alone anymore. But as George composed himself, slipping his phone into his pocket with a calculated calm, he leaned in close. "You have no idea what you've started," he murmured, his eyes cold steel. The diner door jingled again, this time with 2 suited men entering. His security, no doubt. The air thickened with impending clash, leaving everyone on edge. What would happen when the recording went public? Have you ever found strength in a loved one during a hard time? Share your story below. The diner's door slammed shut behind George's security men, their broad shoulders blocking the exit as the jingle of the bell faded into an ominous silence. George straightened his sweater, his composure returning like a mask slipping back into place, his hazel eyes narrowing on Sheila with a venom that made her stomach twist. "You really think a little recording changes anything?" he hissed, his voice low and cutting, stepping closer as the patrons shifted uneasily in their booths. The warm glow of the vintage lights seemed dimmer now, casting harsh shadows across the yellow walls, the air thick with the scent of cooling coffee and rising fear. He'd built Blake Enterprises on deals like this, shady bribes and forced evictions, and one waitress wasn't going to topple it. "Boys, take her phone," he ordered, his tone casual but laced with threat, as if she were just another obstacle to bulldoze. Sheila backed up a step, her hand instinctively going to her pocket where the device burned against her thigh, Jamal positioning himself between her and the advancing men. "You can't do this," she said, her voice steady despite the tremble in her knees, the words echoing her inner resolve. The security guards hesitated, glancing at the crowd. Mr. Harris fumbling for his phone behind the counter, a young couple recording on their cells, the elderly pair whispering about calling the police. George's face twisted in frustration. He'd underestimated the diner's tight-knit community, the way years of shared meals and stories had forged bonds stronger than his money. He lunged forward himself, grabbing for her arm, his grip like iron. "Give it to me now, or I'll make sure you and your boy never work in this town again," he snarled, his breath hot on her face, the threat hitting home as she thought of Jamal's dreams crumbling under his boot. But in that moment, Sheila's fear ignited into fury, a lifetime of being overlooked fueling a fire she could no longer contain. She wrenched her arm free, her other hand pulling out the phone with a defiant flourish. "You want this?" she challenged, her voice rising to fill the room, strong and unyielding. The patrons leaned in, the air electric, as she hit play on the recording, the tinny sound of George's voice spilling out, "Pay off the councilman. Whatever it takes to clear that block. Those people don't matter." Gasps rippled through the diner, phones raised higher to capture the revelation. George's face paling as his own words betrayed him. Jamal stood tall beside her, his hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You got this, Mom." Her courage bloomed fully then, the hidden strength she'd buried under years of hardship emerging like a force of nature. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a fighter, a mother, a voice for the silenced. George staggered back, his security frozen in uncertainty, the power he'd wielded so effortlessly slipping away as the recording looped, exposing his corruption to the room. This is fake," he stammered, but his voice cracked, the arrogance crumbling under the weight of truth. Sheila met his gaze, her chin high, the note, now revealed as a transcript she'd scribbled during her cleaning shift, clutched in her fist like a talisman. The journalist's text buzzed again. "On my way. This is huge." Tension built to a fever pitch, the diner a powder keg as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Someone had called the authorities. George's empire teetered on the edge, but he wasn't done yet, his eyes flashing with desperate rage. What final blow would he strike before the reversal? The sirens grew louder, piercing the thick tension in Rosie's diner as red and blue lights flashed through the windows, painting the yellow walls in urgent strokes. George Maxwell whirled toward the door, his face a storm of panic and denial, as two police officers pushed inside, their badges gleaming under the vintage lights. The crowd of patrons, now a captive audience with phones aloft, formed a circle around the booth where it all began. The spilled coffee long forgotten, but the recording still echoing from Sheila's phone like a damning echo. "What's going on here?" the lead officer demanded, his eyes scanning the room, landing on George's disheveled form and the security men who now looked more like cornered rats than enforcers. Mr. Harris stepped forward, his voice steady for the first time that night. "This man's been threatening my employee, officer. And there's proof of worse. Bribery, corruption. Play it for them, Sheila." Sheila's hand steadied on her phone, the device that had once been just a lifeline to her son, now a weapon of justice. She hit play again, louder this time, George's incriminating words filling the diner. "Pay off the councilman. Whatever it takes." The officers' expressions hardened, one pulling out handcuffs as the other radioed for backup. George backed away, his arrogance shattering like glass, his voice rising in a desperate plea. "This is a setup. She's lying, she's just a waitress." But the words fell flat, the patrons erupting in boos and shouts, their phones capturing every humiliating second. Jamal stood by his mother's side, his arm around her shoulders, whispering, "You did it, Mom. You really did it." The journalist burst through the door moments later, notebook in hand, her eyes wide with the scoop of a lifetime. "I've got the audio, it's going viral as we speak," she announced, holding up her own device where notifications pinged relentlessly. George's empire crumbled in real time, his phone buzzing with calls from panicked board members, headlines already flashing on screens around the room. "Billionaire exposed in diner drama." He slumped into the booth, the same spot where he'd sneered at Sheila's coffee, his hands cuffed behind him as the officers read him his rights. You ruined me," he muttered, his voice broken, but Sheila met his gaze with quiet triumph. "No, Mr. Maxwell. You ruined yourself. All I did was serve the truth." The diner erupted in applause, patrons hugging her, Mr. Harris promising her a raise and ownership stake. "This place is yours now, Sheila. You saved it." Jamal beamed, pulling her into a hug, the bond between them stronger than ever, a testament to the hope she'd clung to through years of struggle. As George was led out in handcuffs, his head bowed in defeat, the weight of betrayal and injustice lifted from the room. Sheila stood taller, respected and redeemed, her courage transforming not just her life but the neighborhood's future. Blake Enterprises would face investigations, the development halted, homes preserved. The moral rang clear: true power comes from kindness and truth, not money or might. Underestimating someone's heart can cost everything. In the end, love and hope prevailed, turning a simple diner into a symbol of resilience.
Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know if you did. We are committed to giving you the best and most touching stories that teach valuable life lessons, so stick around. We have another beautiful story showing on the screen for you. Click on it to watch it now.